Hey everyone, Chris and Jason here with the Private Lenders Podcast, sponsored by our mastermind group for private and hard money lenders, hardmoneymastermind.com. Go check it out anytime, create a free account, see what everyone's talking about. Okay, so one of the things that was being chatted about recently in the mastermind group, I wanted to address here on the podcast, just to give it a more in-depth and like detailed sort of explanation. And the issue that somebody in the mastermind ran into is that a new capital investor they were working with, so there's people that are going to fund their hard money loans along with them, they weren't totally comfortable having the lender in our group close a loan in their company's name and assign it to the investors involved, which is exactly how we do it. Maybe they've done some lending in the past with other groups, something like that. It seemed like they did have some experience and they wanted their name or company name to be on the note and the recorded mortgage or deed of trust, depending on where you are. So, okay, a couple things here. We're going to break down why your investors, if they are experienced and savvy enough, do not want to be recorded in public record, and why, and what we do to make sure that their investments are safeguarded, even though they're not going to have their name in public record.
Yeah. And listen, ideally in a perfect world, you really want your name, your company's name, to be the lender. You know, I get it. The first few deals you do, you bring it on a new investor, they want to be put on the mortgage and the note, or the mortgage and the deed of trust, which is, keep in mind the documents that are getting recorded, right? So the deed of trust, the mortgage is the deed of trust or mortgage, depending on what state you're in, plus the assignment of rents and leases and some other few documents, really the only things that go on record. But in general, the lender's name is on everything on the package. The way that we do it is it's Hard Money Bankers is the lender on everything, no matter what. And then we assign it to capital investors or whoever on the back end. So listen, if your first few deals have them as the lender, have the capital investor's name as the lender, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. But I will tell you that it's not only on a legal side is it kind of get a little funky to put them in public records, but it also is just going to be clunky, right? Like what happens if you have 4 different investors or you have multiple IRAs that are going to be the lenders on these things? Like it's number one, it's not a good look, but I think the majority of the stuff we're going to discuss today are real reasons why it's just not a good business decision to do.
Yeah, for a number of reasons. And let's start with a story. Let's start with a story that really illustrated this for us and prompted the change. So this story dates back to maybe 2010, I want to say 2009 or 10, yep, when we were only in the private lending business for a couple of years. And at that time, we did the old school method of putting any investors involved with the deal on the note and the deed of trust. And like we were just saying, that stuff gets recorded in public, which puts their name in, just like it sounds, a public place. And there's some, not too advantageous things that can happen when your name is in public record. Like you can be getting stuff in the mail that you might not want to receive. Certain people in the real estate world scrape public record to try to find people like this and advertise to them. And the worst case scenario, you might even end up in a lawsuit if this loan goes into default. And that's exactly what happened with us and an investor of ours way back then. So here's the story. There's a guy named Tom, and he was lending through his personal name. He was the only lender, so it was his name on the note and the deed of trust on a property in DC. It was a bridge loan that we did to a guy's company that he was going to use for some investment deals, and then put a lien on an investment property that he owned in DC. Okay, so during the loan term, the guy moves into the property, moves his family into the property, defaults on the loan, and sues us. Okay. This is this doesn't happen very often, once every, hundreds of loans sort of thing, but it can happen. And it did. And because our investor was on the note and the deed of trust with us in public record, he got dragged into a lawsuit. We each had attorneys. We were in the right. I mean, the guy borrowed the money and then turned around and tried to get out of repaying it by suing us. So like, if you do your documents and your underwriting and everything correctly, you should win these cases, as knock on wood, we always have in the past. But that doesn't mean anybody wants to go to court. That doesn't mean like this poor guy he's a savvy business guy, but he's not like super involved in the real estate industry, definitely is not used to litigation, got dragged into court through multiple different hearings and other stuff in DC Superior Court. It was a mess. It was a mess. And we ended up winning in court, and we got our principal and his interest back. He got a full payoff. He got a nice payoff after it being in default for quite a while. But the guy backed out of private lending, never did a deal with us again, and he was scarred from the experience, right? And that's a worst case scenario. That's about as bad as it could happen by having your name in public record. But we made the immediate change to not put our clients, our investor clients' names in public record anymore. And you can absolutely use the story too. There's a real story that happened to us. And okay, so the way we have changed it to do this, in case you haven't, gone through the trainings and everything else in the mastermind group where we explain this in detail, but we close in our name, loan docs and everything is going to go in public record. It's Hard Money Bankers LLC. And then we immediately assign the note and the deed of trust and other documents and some assignment documents. Pretty straightforward. Anybody who does loan docs for you can do stuff like this. And it doesn't have to be deal to deal. After you have your loan documents done by the attorney and your assignment documents done once, you can use that template because nothing else changes but the names and percentages and dollar amounts. We immediately assign this to the investors and we do not record it. That would defeat the purpose. What we do is we sign and notarize the original and mail it over to our attorney's office. Our attorney knows exactly why this is. All of our investors have our attorney's contact information. And the reason is, if for some super unlikely reason HMB ever disappears, they can't reach us, they can call up the attorney and take control of their lien. They say, okay, HMB's gone. I need to record this lien so I can get my money back, right? So we do this to accomplish two goals. One, to keep their privacy and anonymity and keep them out, away from any kind of legal beef that could happen. And also, they still need to have their investment protected in the very unlikely situation that HMB disappears. That's why. That's exactly how I explain it. And I actually had a conversation with a potential new investor. We don't actively look for investor capital anymore since we've been, dealing with investor capital for so long. We have more cash than we need at any given time. But this person was referred by our business partner, Ian, in Philly. And so I was happy to speak with her and might come on board in the future when we have some more availability. And I went through this. She had good questions. She had done some private lending before, and she was asking the right stuff. This was one of them. And that is just how I explained it here in this podcast, is exactly how I explain it to capital investors. And if they're savvy, they totally get it. Even if they're not terribly savvy, that's a pretty straightforward explanation and reasoning, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And keep in mind, as you grow your lending portfolio, there's going to be public records, public notices, lawsuits that might not even have anything to do with you. And I'll explain that here in a second, that come up. And it's just not something that, a passive capital investor who's co-lending with you really, wants to be involved with or should be involved with. And there's no need to, kind of, if you're doing this, appropriately, appropriately in the right way. I mean, keep in mind in this particular case, the story that Chris shared is, we had to get separate counsel. We, side by side, we had to go kind of protect ourselves from a lawsuit. I mean, anybody can sue anybody, right? There's going to be cases where you do a regular loan for a real estate investor buying a property in LLC that's fixing and flipping a house, and they run into trouble. You go and try to force their hand in order to get yourselves paid off. They miss payments. You try to file foreclosure. They file bankruptcy. They do whatever they can in order to prevent you from foreclosing on the property. They file a lawsuit, whatever it is, right? Like, this is real life stuff, that happens, right? You're not doing anything wrong. In this case, you're not at fault. They're doing whatever they can to try to extend the time, get out of the loan obligations. So here's a few other things that come up regularly where not only is it not a good look, but it's really, really difficult to manage on a business side if your name, your lending entity's name that you're controlling and you can sign off of is not on the documents, and it's potentially other capital investors. And if it's, listen, if it's a one capital investor, that's challenging. If it's multiple capital investors and multiple trusts or entities, it's almost impossible. Let me give you an example. You have to do a release or a satisfaction of a mortgage. Depending on what state you're in, they're called different things. Well, we have to sign those satisfactions can't even freaking say the word, but to say, we're
Let's go
doing
lead
those, we're signing those lien releases every time a loan pays off, right? So we have to sign that. We every day we have to sign that. We have to notarize that. Insurance notifications. Insurance notifications come all the time, right? They're mail that comes directly to us all the time. Now imagine if there was multiple lenders on the insurance policy, and what address would that go to? Legal notices. I'll give you an example. The other day, we'll talk about a subpoena legal notice, then we'll talk about a regular legal notice. But I mean, every day we get notifications of like, hey, this guy filed bankruptcy. You used to have a lien against a house of his 10 years ago, right? And we're getting, that from bankruptcy court. We're getting lien release like that. Every once in a while, we're getting subpoenas to subpoena docs on a past loan that we did that
unrelated, totally unrelated,
completely unrelated. I'll give you an example. So a few weeks ago, a process server was trying to get in touch with somebody here in order to, serve us papers for a borrower that we did a loan for a year and a half ago that's already paid us off, but he's going through a child support case. And he's not and not paying child support, and they need to give us legal notice, or they need to give us a subpoena so we can share with them our loan doc set or whatever additional documents that they're asking for, right? So again, what happens if your private capital investor was the person on that loan, and they had a process server show up at their house to do that? Like that's not cool, not something that they want. And these are things that happen regularly. They'll come, process servers have to come to our office. And again, these are completely unrelated to our current loan. This is just things that happen because, they need to get in touch with somebody at our office in order to sign these things, which is fine. Happy to do it.
Yeah, it's part of the business. It's not part of what your private passive capital investor should be responsible for. And in case you were thinking, oh, well, we'll put their names on it and just use our address. That way we get everything. If something goes down, they're going to look these people up, right? They're not just going to be like, oh, everyone's located at, Old Columbia Road where our office is. They will look up people's names or company names and send them stuff at whatever whatever they can find in terms of their business or personal information online. They'll be sending them stuff directly too. So just using your address doesn't solve the problem. The process that we're talking about really does, and it still keeps the people protected. So when talking to new capital investors and describing this, tell them exactly why and exactly how you protect them and what you're doing it for. And they'll totally get it. Especially like the more, successful of a business person and investor they are, the less they want to be public and visible and bothered with all the stuff that we're talking about. So it really should not be an obstacle that's hard to overcome. It shouldn't be an obstacle at all. It should just show that you're savvy and you know how to protect your people and to put them in the best situation that you can. So if I wouldn't even, doing all the investor relations for our company, I couldn't even imagine all the questions and calls and stuff I would get about investors that were freaking out for no reason because they got some mail about something, it would just be a nightmare scenario. So we learned quickly, took a year or two, something like that, a year or two of being in business. Obviously, a lot of the point of the podcast and the mastermind group is to provide you guys with information and value so that you don't have to make the same mistakes we did when we were doing the whole trial and error way of starting a hard money lending company. And instead, we can just shortcut it for you. So that's the answer to the question. And the mastermind, I wanted to give it a little more, background and explanation and reasoning than I would just type out on a comment in there. But that being said, in case you have not yet checked out the mastermind group, go create a free account, hardmoneymastermind.com. That's really the best place to get a hold of us and to ask questions of your own about anything related to private lending. We're in there every day. It's up on my screen, and we are checking in with people's questions and interacting with our members all the time. So definitely go check it out. And we will see you next time on the podcast as well.
See you guys soon. Thanks again.